Okay, so we all know that teenagers are supposed to be like walking hormones, right?
Right.
And like they make all these bad decisions
Uh-huh.
and are impulsive and moody and rebellious.
Yeah.
The stereotype.
Yeah.
But it turns out that there's actually a lot more going on
Yeah.
in their brains than maybe we give them credit for.
Sure.
So what's the real story?
Well, it is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
We used to think it was all about hormones
Right.
and just a lack of maturity.
Uh-huh.
But now we know that there are just these incredible transformations happening in their brains,
Okay.
particularly in those crucial teenage years.
So it's not just hormones.
Not just hormones.
What is it?
Well, think of the teenage brain like a major renovation project.
Okay.
It's literally rewiring itself,
Wow.
particularly in the frontal cortex.
And remind me what the frontal cortex is responsible for.
Right, well, that's the part of the brain that's responsible for things like planning, decision making,
Okay.
keeping our emotions in check. So it's like upgrading from a flip phone to the latest smartphone, a total system overhaul.
Wow, okay, so big changes are happening.
Huge changes.
But what does that actually look like?
Well, imagine like a dense forest
Okay.
with tons of overgrown pathways.
Okay.
Some are well trodden and some are barely there.
Okay.
That's kind of what a young brain looks like.
Uh-huh.
During adolescence, the brain starts to prune those pathways.
Interesting.
It strengthens the connections that are used a lot
Okay.
and eliminates the ones that aren't.
So it gets rid of the ones that aren't being used.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this is called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning.
And it's a crucial part of development.
Okay, so it's like decluttering the brain to make it more efficient.
Exactly.
Okay.
And to make things even faster, a fatty substance called myelin
Okay.
starts to wrap around those strengthened connections.
Interesting.
Like insulation on electrical wires.
Oh, okay.
It helps signals travel more efficiently, which is essential for things like quick thinking and complex decision making.
So this is all making the brain faster and more efficient.
Exactly. Streamlining.
Yeah.
But, it still doesn't quite explain the impulsivity we see in teens.
Right.
Their brains are becoming more efficient, but
Yeah.
they still make some pretty risky choices.
Yes, they do.
How does that fit in?
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating.
Okay.
The parts of the brain that are associated with pleasure and excitement, what we call the reward system,
Okay.
actually develop faster than the areas responsible for self-control.
Oh, interesting.
So this means teens are wired to seek thrills and novelty before they've fully developed the ability to think things through
Okay.
or consider long-term consequences.
So their brains are primed for excitement,
Yeah,
but the brakes aren't quite there yet.
exactly.
Got it.
They're driven by this surge of dopamine,
Dopamine.
that feel-good neurotransmitter,
Okay.
which is released when they experience something new or exciting.
So new things, exciting things.
Yes.
Lots of dopamine.
Makes them more likely to take risks, even if those risks aren't the best choices in the long run.
Yeah, okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Wasn't that feeling of trying something new and exhilarating
Uh-huh.
pretty much the best feeling ever when you were a teenager?
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, the thrill of the unknown was everything.
Absolutely.
So how does this tie into the whole social aspect of being a teenager?
Right.
Because we all know how important social dynamics are at that age.
Oh, incredibly important.
Right.
Teenagers are extremely sensitive to social cues and dynamics.
Okay.
Their brains are constantly processing social information, which can lead to really intense emotions and sometimes overreactions.
Because everything is amplified.
Everything's amplified.
At that age.
Think about it, at that age, social acceptance was everything, right? Fitting in with your peers, being part of the group, it was all incredibly important.
Social acceptance was like life or death.
It really felt that way, didn't it?
Yeah.
So their brains are magnifying those feelings of social pressure.
Yeah, okay, so we've got this heightened sensitivity,
Right.
and we've got underdeveloped impulse control.
Right.
What could go wrong?
Exactly. So when you combine those two things, it can sometimes lead to poor decisions.
Okay.
Especially in situations where their peers are involved.
Right, so they might do things they wouldn't normally do.
Exactly.
If their friends are around.
To impress their friends, to avoid being excluded.
Right, peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure.
So it's like a perfect storm of brain development.
It really is.
That can sometimes lead to those risky behaviors we associate with teenagers.
In a way, yes, but it's important to remember this isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
This drive for novelty and excitement also fuels their incredible capacity for learning and exploration. It's what pushes them to step outside their comfort zones and try new things.
So it's not just about recklessness.
No.
It's about that thirst for experience and discovery.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
It's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Now, on top of all of this,
Okay.
there's another factor that often gets overlooked.
What's that?
Sleep.
Ah, yes.
The teenage sleep cycle.
Always a point of contention.
Always a point of contention, right?
But is it really true that they're not just being lazy?
It's completely true.
Sure.
It's not laziness at all. Their bodies are working on a different schedule.
Interesting.
Melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep,
Okay.
rises and falls later in teenagers compared to adults.
Oh, okay.
So this means they naturally feel more alert at night
Okay.
and tired in the morning.
Oh, that makes sense.
Imagine having jet lag all the time.
Yeah, that's rough.
That's what it's like for them.
So asking them to wake up early for school is like asking them to function on barely any sleep.
Yeah.
Wow, I never thought about it that way.
And this has a huge impact on their behavior and how we interpret it.
Oh, for sure.
It's not necessarily defiance.
No.
It's their biology working against them.
It's literally how their body is working.
Yeah.
This completely changes my perspective on those early morning struggles.
I bet.
Sounds like we need to rethink our expectations
Yeah.
and how we approach teenagers' behavior.
I think so.
Yeah?
Understanding the science behind the teenage brain can help us navigate this phase with more empathy and less frustration.
Good.
We need to provide them with support and guidance while also recognizing their incredible potential for growth and change. After all, these teenage years are a crucial time for developing into the adults they'll eventually become.
It's such a fascinating time, isn't it?
It really is.
So we've learned about this intense rewiring,
Yeah.
the reward system in overdrive, the impact of social sensitivity,
Right.
and the sleep cycle thing.
Yeah.
That's a game changer.
Big time.
Really helps to put things into perspective.
It does, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really does.
So we talked about how the brain is like under construction,
Right.
but how does that actually like play out in everyday life?
Yeah.
Like, for example, why do teenagers seem to like rebel against authority
Yeah.
so often?
Well, remember that frontal cortex we were talking about?
Yeah.
The part responsible for impulse control,
Right.
weighing long-term consequences.
Uh-huh.
That's still very much a work in progress during the teenage years.
So still under construction.
Exactly.
Got it.
So when teenagers are faced with rules or restrictions,
Uh-huh.
their brains may not fully grasp the reasons behind those rules
Okay.
or prioritize the potential negative outcomes of breaking them.
So it's not necessarily that they're trying to be defiant.
Right.
It's more like their brains aren't quite equipped to think that far ahead yet.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
And we also have to remember their heightened sensitivity to social rewards. Peer acceptance and approval can often overshadow
Yeah.
the perceived value of following rules set by adults.
So fitting in with their friends becomes more important than pleasing their parents or teachers.
You could say that.
Okay.
It's not that they don't care what adults think.
Right.
It's that their brains are wired to prioritize social rewards differently during this time.
So it's like they're programmed for social experimentation almost.
Yeah,
Like pushing them to test boundaries,
right.
challenge the status quo.
That's a great way to think about it. They're
Yeah.
figuring out where they fit in,
Yeah.
exploring their independence,
Yeah.
trying to establish their own identity.
Right.
It's a very important time for all that.
So fascinating how all these neurological changes
Yeah.
connect directly to these classic teenage behaviors
Mm-hmm.
we see,
For sure.
but it also sounds like a recipe for conflict,
Oh, absolutely.
especially with parents or teachers who might not understand what's really going on. So how can we as adults, approach this phase more effectively?
Yeah.
How do we support teenagers without stifling their need to explore and assert their independence?
Well, I think open and honest communication is key.
Okay.
Creating a safe space where teenagers feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and feelings without judgment.
That sounds so important.
Yeah,
But how do we actually get them to talk to us?
right.
Teenagers aren't exactly known for being open and communicative.
It can definitely be challenging,
Yeah.
but try to approach conversations with curiosity rather than confrontation.
Okay.
Listen actively to what they have to say, even if you don't agree with their perspective.
So even when their logic seems completely off.
Even then,
Right.
remember their brains are still developing and their reasoning skills are a work in progress.
Okay.
Engaging in respectful dialogue, even when it's tough,
Yeah.
can help them learn to articulate their thoughts and consider different points of view.
So it's about guiding them towards more mature decision making,
Yeah.
not dictating their choices.
Exactly.
Right.
And don't forget about that heightened emotional sensitivity.
Right.
It's essential to acknowledge and validate their feelings, even if they seem exaggerated or irrational to us.
Right, because those feelings are very real to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Validating their emotions helps them feel understood and supported even when you're setting boundaries on their behavior.
Correct.
Shows them that you respect them and take their feelings seriously.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the intensity of those emotions,
Yeah.
not dismissing them as just typical teenage drama.
Exactly.
Right.
Now let's talk about that dopamine-driven reward system again.
Okay.
Because we can actually use that to our advantage.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Teenagers are incredibly motivated by positive reinforcement.
Okay.
Instead of focusing solely on punishments for misbehavior, try acknowledging and rewarding their efforts and accomplishments,
Okay.
no matter how small they may seem.
So catch them doing something good
Yeah.
and make sure they know you noticed.
Exactly.
Okay.
Celebrate their successes big and small.
Yeah.
It could be anything from getting a good grade to helping out around the house without being asked.
Right.
These small acts of recognition can go a long way.
So it's about shifting the focus from what they're doing wrong
Yeah,
to what they're doing right.
exactly.
Okay.
And remember how quickly their brains process rewards?
Yes.
Immediate feedback is key.
Okay.
The sooner they receive that positive reinforcement,
Uh-huh.
the more impactful it will be.
So we can kind of like hack into their reward system
In a way, yes.
to encourage positive behavior.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we can work with their natural drive for rewards to help
Right.
them develop healthy habits and make more responsible choices.
Okay.
It's a much more effective and positive approach than constantly focusing on what they're doing wrong.
Right.
It's all about framing, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
But let's be realistic. Even with the best intentions and strategies, there are going to be times when things get tough.
Right.
Conflicts are inevitable.
Of course.
How do we handle those situations without damaging the relationship?
Right, that's a good question.
That's where understanding the neurological underpinnings of their behavior becomes especially important.
Okay.
When teenagers make mistakes or act impulsively, it's not always because they're trying to be difficult or disrespectful.
So try not to take it personally.
Right.
Got it.
Try to separate the behavior from the person.
Okay.
Remember, their brains are still under construction.
Right.
And they're bound to make mistakes along the way.
Makes sense.
It's all part of the learning process.
So they're a work in progress.
Exactly.
And not a finished product.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it's important to set boundaries and consequences, but do so in a way that's calm, consistent, and respectful.
So teaching them accountability without crushing their spirit.
Yes, precisely. And no matter what, keep those lines of communication open.
Yeah.
Let them know that you're there for them even when they mess up.
Right.
That unconditional support can make a world of difference.
It really can.
It can.
That is all incredibly valuable advice.
I hope so.
Like a roadmap for navigating the teenage years with more understanding and less frustration.
I like that.
But I have to ask,
Yeah.
what about that infamous teenage lethargy?
Right.
Is there anything we can do about that?
Well, ideally, schools would adjust their schedules
Okay.
to better align with teenagers' natural sleep patterns.
You mean later start times?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But until that happens,
Yeah.
we can at least try to be more understanding of their early morning struggles.
Right.
It's not laziness, it's biology.
So cut them some slack when they're dragging themselves out of bed.
Yes.
Try to avoid scheduling important things early in the morning when their brains are still waking up.
Exactly.
Okay.
Remember, we're learning to work with their biology, not against it. This whole shift in perspective, recognizing that their behavior isn't random or deliberately rebellious, but driven by these complex brain transformations, is incredibly empowering.
It really is.
Yeah.
Makes you realize that the teenage brain,
Uh-huh.
with all its quirks and challenges,
Yeah.
is truly remarkable.
It is. And speaking of remarkable, we haven't even touched on how all of this impacts their ability to learn.
That's right.
Yeah.
We've talked about underdeveloped frontal cortexes, impulsive behavior.
Right.
Doesn't all of that make it harder for them to learn?
Well, it's true that their frontal cortexes are still developing, which can definitely impact things like organization and planning.
Okay.
But remember, their brains are also incredibly adaptable.
Right.
And eager for new experiences. They're constantly soaking up information and making connections.
So even with all these changes happening,
Yeah.
their brains are still primed for learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, you could argue that the teenage brain is almost uniquely wired for learning.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
They're naturally curious, driven by a thirst for knowledge,
Okay.
and constantly seeking out new experiences.
Right.
And don't forget about that powerful reward system.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So when teenagers experience success in learning, that dopamine rush
Yes.
reinforces the behavior,
Motivates them to keep going.
creates a positive feedback loop.
Wow.
Success fuels motivation, which leads to more success.
Yeah,
Powerful cycle.
that's great.
That's why it's so important to create learning environments that are challenging but achievable,
Okay.
where teenagers feel like they're making progress and mastering new skills.
Yeah.
That sense of accomplishment is crucial for keeping them engaged.
This makes me think about traditional teaching methods.
Long
Lectures, rote memorization, standardized tests.
Right.
Are those really the best ways to engage a teenage brain? Yeah, it seems like we could be doing so much more.
Yeah.
That's a great point, and it's something educators are grappling with more and more.
Yeah.
Traditional methods often fail to tap into teenagers' natural curiosity and their need for active engagement.
Right.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
So what are some alternative approaches that might be more effective?
Right, like how can we take what we know about the teenage brain and apply it to education?
Well, active learning techniques, for example, can be incredibly powerful.
Give me an example.
Think hands-on projects, group discussions, problem-solving activities, anything that gets teenagers actively involved in the learning process instead of passively absorbing information.
So making it an experience, not just a chore.
Exactly.
Got it.
And technology can play a huge role here too.
Okay, how so?
Interactive simulations, educational games, online collaboration tools. These can all make learning more engaging and relevant for teenagers.
Especially in today's digital world.
Precisely meeting them where they are, digitally speaking.
Right.
And we shouldn't underestimate the power of personalization. Teenagers are much more likely to connect with material that feels relevant to their own interests and goals.
So tailoring lessons to their individual needs and passions.
Yes.
Okay.
When teenagers feel like they have a voice and a choice in their learning, they're much more likely to take ownership of the process and really dive in.
This all sounds so promising.
I think so.
It feels like we're finally starting to unlock the true potential of the teenage brain and create learning environments that are both effective and enjoyable.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everybody.
It really is.
Yeah.
So inspiring to think about the possibilities.
I agree.
So we've debunked some myths. Explored some incredible neuroscience.
Yes.
Uncovered some practical strategies for supporting teenagers.
It's been a good conversation.
It has. Yeah. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Let me think.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the most important takeaway is that the teenage brain, while it's a work in progress, is truly remarkable.
Okay.
It's a time of immense potential.
Yeah.
And with the right support and understanding, teenagers can navigate these challenges and emerge as confident, capable adults.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
This has been an amazing journey.
Yes.
Into the world of the teenage brain. We've covered so much ground.
We have.
It really has.
From brain rewiring to reward systems to social dynamics.
And everything in between.
And everything in between.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, for sure. There's so much more we could talk about.
Of this fascinating topic.
It's true. The more we learn about this crucial period of development, the better equipped we'll be to support teenagers as they navigate those often challenging, but ultimately rewarding years.
Absolutely. And speaking of rewarding.
Oh, here we go.
There's one more thing we wanted to mention.
You're going to recommend some music again, aren't you?
I can't help myself.
I knew it.
Music is such a powerful way to connect with emotions and experiences. And there's one song in particular that we think really captures the essence of what we've been talking about today.
You're talking about Brainy by The National.
Yes, good choice. This song is a must-listen.
I agree.
A beautiful and haunting piece of music.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is amazing how much we're learning.
I know, right?
About the teenage brain. Who knew there was so much going on up there?
It's incredible, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
There's one aspect of teenage life we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
That I think a lot of people might relate to.
Yeah.
And it's something that can feel pretty all-consuming when you're that age. What about those intense romantic relationships?
Oh, yes.
That often pop up during the teenage years.
Teenage love, a classic theme for a reason.
It is.
Yeah.
So is it really just a case of hormones going haywire?
Hormones definitely play a role.
Okay.
Puberty brings a surge in hormones like testosterone and estrogen, which increase libido and those feelings of attraction.
So that's part of it.
That's part of it.
But I imagine there's more to it than that. Oh, there's definitely more to it than that.
Like, those feelings can be so intense.
Yes.
So overwhelming.
They really can.
There must be something else going on in the brain.
Well, remember all the rewiring we discussed?
Yeah.
The areas of the brain that process emotions and social connections are also undergoing major transformations during adolescence.
So their brains are becoming more attuned to social cues?
Yeah.
And more sensitive to emotional experiences?
Precisely.
And then there's that reward system.
Oh, yes. Always the reward system.
Right. We talked about romantic love triggers this huge release of dopamine, right?
Huge release.
Creating these intense feelings of euphoria and pleasure.
It's like they're experiencing those romantic highs on a whole other level.
Exactly.
Which can be exhilarating, of course.
Right.
But it can also be really overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for teenagers who haven't yet developed the emotional regulation skills to manage those intense feelings.
It makes sense then why those first heartbreaks can feel so devastating.
They really do. Their brains haven't yet built up the resilience and the coping mechanisms that adults have for dealing with emotional pain.
It's all very new.
It's very new, very raw.
So how can we as adults support teenagers through these inevitable ups and downs of romantic relationships?
It's tough, right?
It is.
What can we do to help them navigate those intense emotions?
Right.
Well, I think the most important thing is to validate their feelings without minimizing their experiences.
So even if their relationship seems insignificant or temporary to us.
Even then, remember for them, those feelings are very real.
Right.
And very powerful.
Okay.
Dismissing their emotions can make them feel isolated and misunderstood.
Yeah.
Like they can't talk to us about what they're going through.
Right, like they can't come to us for help.
Exactly. So it's about acknowledging the intensity of those feelings without necessarily endorsing the choices they're making.
Right, so we don't have to agree with everything.
No, not at all.
But we need to acknowledge that they're going through something.
Exactly. And it's so important to create a space where they feel safe talking about their experiences without judgment.
Yeah.
Let them know you're there to listen and offer support, even if you don't agree with everything they do.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
We've covered so much ground, from brain rewiring to reward systems to teenage love.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think about all the complex changes happening in those teenage brains.
It really is, and I think the key takeaway here is that adolescence, with all its challenges and complexities, is a period of incredible growth and potential.
It's like watching a butterfly emerge from its cocoon.
That's a beautiful analogy.
And with the right support and understanding,
yes,
teenagers can navigate these transformations and emerge as confident, resilient adults ready to take on the world.
Absolutely.
That's a great message to end on.
I think so.